Hello, I'm Emily Rhodes, and this is my July webcast, for which I will be talking about Saplings by Noel Streatfeild. You might notice that this book is very beautifully kind of grey with these lovely end papers hidden inside. And I'm actually filming this sitting in my little Persephone Books nook, which is in our living room. You can see this is like the edge of the sofa. And here are my Persephone books. So all Persephone books are published like this, these grey covers and different end papers inside. That's quite a nice one. And the end papers are always appropriate to the theme and the time that the book's set. And because, you know, if you go into a bookshop and all you see are grey books, they actually republished some of their bestsellers with kind of interesting pictures on the front so that they stand out a bit more. This is a very good one, Someone at a Distance. Saplings actually does exist with a colourful jacket, but I have the grey one. And so that's how the Persephone books look. They are mostly written by women and mostly from around the mid-20th century. And I would say their books are characterised by being incredibly readable. The pages just sort of whiz by, which is in some ways surprising because they're also quite, I don't know if gentle's the right word, but they're very domestic. They're very much about the home and the kind of daily life of women in a way, rather than any sort of crazy thrillers with adventures and twists. You know, it always seems surprising to me that I sit down and I read the book and I literally sit down and, you know, get up 100 pages later. You can't believe the pages have just gone. And if you're trying to describe what happens in the plot, it feels so small, you know, just these little things like, oh, well, you know, they made lunch or they went to the beach or whatever it was. It's, anyway, if you don't know their books, do check them out. They're really good. And today we're going to be talking about Saplings. So, I expect you might have heard of Noel Streatfeild as the author of Ballet Shoes, a really loved and celebrated children's book about these three fossil children. In a way, they're kind of foundlings and their life on the stage. She also wrote adult books, and this is the first, in fact, of her adult books to be republished. It's definitely an adult book. Like, it's not suitable for children, I would say. It takes the Wiltshire family, who are the most kind of English upper middle class family you could imagine. And it begins just before the outbreak of the Second World War. Interestingly, it's published in 1945. So, you know, really, it covers the Second World War, but it must have been so fresh when she wrote it, you know, so it wasn't writing it looking back from a position, you know, a decade on. You know, the war had literally just ended. And the book begins in this scene that is almost like a painting. You know, these four children, their father and mother on a beach, and they're going swimming, and then Nanny arrives with their buns and milk, and they go off and get dressed and sort of have lunch. It seems very idyllic on the surface, although I think you can already see certain kind of cracks in that the children are quite highly strung in a way, and they really rely on and treasure their one-on-one time with the grown-ups. You know, Tony, the oldest boy, has this like nice chat with his dad that makes him feel very important, and Laurel, the oldest girl, is feeling all edgy, and her mother Lena takes her off and they have a sort of bath and put loads of cologne in it, and she therefore feels much happier. So it's an idyllic scene, but with quite a lot of parental and adult involvement. Because as well as the parents, there's this nanny who is this kind of wonderful figure. She's so sort of solid and so knowledgeable, and I would rather love to have her in my life. There's also a great governess called Ruth Glover, whose trajectory kind of unusually in the book, because because what I'm coming on to say is that this idyllic scene as the family explodes and is destroyed by war. So they're sort of splintered all over the place, and the children really bear the scars. And for many characters in the book, war is a real tragedy, either by literally kind of killing them or by damaging them psychologically. Excuse me. But for Ruth Glover, she actually goes on the up. She kind of goes off and gets a uniform, works incredibly hard, and ends up, basically running off with the uncle. So she's gone from governess upwards. But anyway, the book is about the impact of war specifically on these children and on society more generally. And what I think is kind of extraordinary and bold and quite radical and fascinating for me was the amount of attention Noel Streatfeild pays to the psychological makeup of her characters, specifically the children. So, although it's about this, quite nuclear family, these 4 kids and their parents, Alex and Lena, there's also, in fact, a really wide cast of characters. So they go and stay with Alex's parents, who are wonderful grandparents, and actually the grandfather really does kind of save the day. Excuse me. So I would really recommend this book as a present for a good grandfather. It's he's a fantastic character in this book and really holds everything together. So there's this cast of characters. Yeah, Alex, we learn, is one of 5, and he's got these 4 sisters who each have their own setup. Whether, one's a novelist without children, the other's married to a vicar, another's got 2 children who she thinks are extraordinarily gifted. There's another one who's left her children to kind of bring themselves up a bit more. And so there are them. There's these 2 evacuees who are billeted to stay with the grandparents as well. There's the school teachers. There's all the staff. There are these other men, including this kind of American who comes in after, spoiler alert, Alex, the dad, who is really wonderful, gets killed in a bomb at home, which is very sad. So that's one of the ways that, the children really feel this and suffer. And also the 2 evacuees go back to London because their mother misses them so much, and they also get killed. So there's this feeling of death being around on the home front, as well as, in a more kind of cosmic way out at fighting Germany. So death is very present, and it's not really easily talked about. Quite an interesting thing is that the deaths always happen kind of by omission. We see Alex kind of putting a log on the fire, and then it ends the chapter. And the next chapter is Tony, his oldest son, kind of racing back to try and visit the bomb site. We're not told that Alex has been killed until Tony kind of sees it. So there's this awful feeling of death happening all the time, but kind of almost off stage, like it can't be written about directly, which actually reminds me of To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, where I think a similar thing happens, and the deaths will happen in brackets, I think. But yes, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, so there's this huge cast of characters, but she goes to great efforts to really look at the psychological makeup of her characters. So right at the start, with the scene on the beach, you kind of see what all the different children are thinking, whether that's through Alex's perspective of him knowing that, Tony needs a little chat and Kim needs a bit of a shove, and sorry, not a shove as in a violent, but to kind of stop him making such a fuss and get him swimming. Lena knows that Laurel needs, some time alone to cheer her out of her mood. So often it's the parents or the nanny or governess who know what the children are thinking. Sometimes it's also the the authorial narrator kind of telling us how these children are feeling. And as the novel develops and, everything goes so wrong, this often develops into quite medical descriptions of these psychological disorders and traumas. So Tuesday, the youngest child, gets an imaginary friend. Tony suffers these terrible panic attacks, which are so kind of brilliantly, awfully drawn. Tuesday also suffers from, I've got to look this word up because I actually never heard of it, eneurosis, which is the technical term for weeing yourself, which, I have dealt with children doing that. And Lena, the mother, has this full-on kind of nervous breakdown and turns to alcoholism. So it's really interesting how she's looking at the psychological impact of war. And I wonder, because there are all these characters and many of us really identified and were fascinated by certain ones, particularly Laurel, the oldest girl, Lena, the mother who has the breakdown. Interestingly, one really popular character was Sylvia, who was one of Alex's sisters, married to this awful vicar, and the way she kind of gets around him. Alice, another cousin. There are a lot of characters who people really liked, and when on our walk, we just talked and talked and talked about them as though they were kind of real people, which is unusual, I think, in a book for them to feel that real. But I think some of them do feel a little bit more, not quite as well-rounded, maybe a little bit two-dimensional. And I wonder if this was because Streatfeild was concentrating so much on, mapping out the psychology of these characters that perhaps other aspects of them were maybe a little rough around the edges. But, I completely forgive her for that because I thought the psychological side was so interesting. But, the book kind of maps the downfall of the Wiltshire family. And I think to accept this as the plot, you have to think that at the beginning it really was idyllic. And there's actually this moment, I think I've just got time to read it out, where Ruth, the governess, is kind of calls this into question. She's talking to Dot, who is one of Alex's sisters. And she says, Ruth thought back to the days before the war, the regulated, graceful existence. Laurel's lessons, Laurel skipping along on her way to classes, Laurel flying down the stairs as Alex's car stopped at the front door, Alex's way of talking about his children. She kind of goes on like that for a bit. They were an exceptionally united and happy family, weren't they? Dot clapped her hands together, for the wind was cold. I've never believed in treating children as though they were climbing plants, pruning and clipping and fixing down each shoot where you want it. Ruth stared up the road to the bend round which the bus would come. Most of the leaves were off the trees. An occasional dried up leaf blew off a branch, was tossed up the road, making a scratching sound. The clouds hung low and grey. She felt a sadness that was like lethargy after an illness. I suppose if Mr. Wiltshire could have seen into the future, he might have brought them up differently. But I don't know. They were happy, and that's something to have by you. She felt she could not pursue the subject. Dot's children had, from her point of view, practically brought themselves up, but it seemed to be working. Had too much trouble been taken with the Wiltshires? So I really like the way, Dot here carries on the metaphor of the title, the sort of saplings metaphor, that these 4 children are saplings, young trees. And she says she doesn't think they should be treated like climbing plants, sort of pruning them and clipping them. And Dot's children, she has these 3 children who are completely fine. They sort of muddle along really happily at school. They're confident. They're not psychologically scarred. And the Wiltshire family really are. They really are marked by the trauma of war. And I suppose, it's this question of, was it idyllic at the beginning or wasn't it? Were the parents too involved? Were the grown-ups too involved? Do the children need to run wild? Anyway, I'll leave you with that thought. Looking forward to seeing you again after the summer.